profiles young. Instagram is my favorite time waster app. I spend a good chunk of my free time browsing it. I've gotten my fair share of creepy DMs. I've learned to ignore them. So when I got a notification from Instagram that some random account requested to DM me, I didn't sweat it. I did, however, just open the DM because I always do out of curiosity. The DM was a link to another Instagram profile named Perfect Always with a Z. I pressed the link and it opened this page with a bunch of pictures of girls, like young girls, seemingly varying in ages from 13 to 20. As I continued to scroll through the account, I picked up on an unsettling fact, that all the pictures seemed to have been taken in secret. Like one girl was on a school bus, one was sitting on a park bench, one was taken from behind a bush of a girl walking on a sidewalk, one was taken of a group of girls at a college campus. Expecting to find perverted comments on the posts, all I found were positive comments like "keep up the good work" and "nice." There were also some comments with random numbers, like 500, and that's it. And every single account that commented appeared to be spam accounts, like no profile pictures and no followers. It was a weird and creepy account, so I reported it and sent a link of it to my friend Allie. Then I went about my business. I was at school when all this happened, so I couldn't give it too much attention to begin with. It wasn't until after school when I got home that Allie finally texted back saying, "OMFG, who did that? That's crazy." I replied, "I know, it's so creepy." She seemed more concerned and shocked than I was expecting her to be. She replied saying, "You need to report that to the police right away." I replied back, "Why me? It's not exactly my problem." She replied back with nothing but question marks mixed with exclamation points. So I said, "Why are you freaking out?" She said, "Why don't you care about someone posting pictures of you on their Instagram?" My heart sank. I immediately rushed to click the link again and view the profile. This time there were 2 new photos uploaded to the page. One of a girl in the passenger seat of an SUV, and one a picture of me walking home. It was taken from inside a car parked on the side of the road. I remembered seeing that car, and I remembered noticing someone sitting in it. This just seemed unreal. I called Allie at once, freaking out. I told her why I didn't understand at first, and explained how some random account DM'd me the link. Allie told me to report it to Instagram and the police. I told her I reported it to Instagram already and told her to do the same. I stayed locked in my room talking to Allie for at least an hour, as I was home alone. The next time I refreshed that Instagram page, it said, "This page does not exist." First thought, okay, it blocked me, so I asked Allie to refresh it as well, and it said the same thing for her. We both used our Finsta accounts to confirm that it was removed, and it was. The account no longer appeared. I still don't know if it was taken down by Instagram or if the creator of the account deactivated it. I also have no idea what those numbers in the comments meant. Either way, it seemed like one big setup thing, and I'm scared to know any other details about what was going on with that Instagram page. This situation happened in my first year of high school. I was 15 years old and lived pretty far from school, which resulted in me taking public transportation to and from there. My Instagram was set to public back then, and I never really cared much about who followed me, which, in retrospect, being a young teen, I should have. My page was pretty standard. I was visible in most of my posts, posing by myself or with a couple of my friends for the most part. I also post a lot of my story, which for those of you who don't know, allows users to share photos and videos to their story for 24 hours. In those stories, I would sometimes include a shot of me waiting for the bus or at the subway with music playing in the background. I remember posting such one day, and randomly looking at my stories and seeing who viewed them. I had around 120 views, most of them from people I knew. One account in particular stuck out. The profile pic showed an unfamiliar middle-aged man. The selfie was taken at a weird close-up angle, like those cliché parent selfies. He had seen every one of my stories posted. I didn't really think that much of it, and continued about my day. Hours later, when I was nearing sleep at around 2 a.m., I got notifications that that same man had requested to DM me, followed me, and liked all my posts. I had about 12 posts, so it wasn't a crazy amount of notifications. I opened his DM and it just said, "Hey," with a smiley face. I definitely found this crazy weird, so I didn't respond and checked his profile. His username was odd. Sam with a bunch of numbers. He only had one post, the weird angled selfie with 2 likes. I finally got a decent look at his face. He was pale and bald with dark tinted sports glasses. He seemed to be wearing a ripped white t-shirt. He had 5 followers and was following around 400 people, which mostly consisted of teenage girls, young women, and a few celebrities. Realizing what an actual creeper this guy was, I blocked him, plain and simple. In the morning, I got off the subway stop that's next to my school and took a seat on the bench in the middle of the platform to adjust my backpack. Upon doing this, I felt someone watching me. The platform was packed with people, so I thought maybe it was just my anxiety. I rose up and turned to find the now familiar middle-aged creep staring at me. His eyes were a glossy blue color, sunken and droopy. He stood a good 20 feet from me, just gawking with an angered frown. I felt a strong urge to throw up and cry at the same time. My skin prickled and my whole body filled with fear. Everything I was feeling was multiplied by 1,000 as I realized he was slowly walking towards me. No one paid him any attention. No one batted an eye. And I remember breathing hard and heavily, wishing someone would pick up on what was happening. I turned and speed walked around and past people trying to lose him. Though with each step I took back, he took 2 steps forward. He was getting a lot closer to me by the second. It was all happening so fast, and I honest to God didn't know whether to continue to run or attempt to draw attention to him. I ran into a woman with a seemingly friendly face on the stairs, and that's when I decided on the latter. I told her that guy in white is following me. As I spoke, I heard my own voice quiver, and that's when I realized how afraid and panicked I actually was. She noticed the man I was referring to at the bottom of the steps, and right away she called him out. She told him to stop following me or she'd call the police. Her shouts made him freeze as others began to stop and take note of the situation. She stood protectively in front of me, waiting for his next move. I took the opportunity to snap a quick pic of his face that I would later use to report him. In my head, all I thought was, he's not going to do anything with people watching me. He can't be that stupid. And I was right. He turned around and got on the next subway train. The woman walked me to my school, and on the way, I couldn't help but wonder how that man could have possibly found me. And then I remembered. I posted a story of the subway stop I got off. That realization alone made my skin crawl and taught me a very important lesson to never reveal your specific location to your public social media. After the woman walked me to my school, I thanked her and actually gave her a hug. I don't know what I would have done if she hadn't stepped in. I wasn't brave enough to say anything to the man, so frozen in fear. But that woman was, and I'm forever grateful for her. And I hope that if anyone is ever in her position, that they will step in and use their voice to help. The internet and social media can be a very dangerous thing. This personal experience of mine is a prime example of what I mean. I've had an Instagram account for like 7 years now. I used to post on it a lot more when I was younger. These days I really don't post at all, and I only open the app like once a day just to browse my friends' posts or whatever. Well, recently I lost my phone. I figured it was time for a new one anyway though. I did try the whole find my iPhone thing, but it said my phone was like 30 miles away. It just wasn't worth it for that old phone. Moving on, one day not too long ago, I got a DM from a kid from high school that I hadn't spoken to in years. In fact, I didn't even follow him. I peeped what he DM'd me, and it was a heads up message. He was bringing it to my attention that someone was using my pictures on a fake Instagram account. He shared the profile in question with me, so I had a look and realized he was right. There was this entire account pretending to be me, just using a different name. There were pictures I'd never even posted on Instagram before on there, pictures exclusive to my old phone. My head was spinning. I actually felt sick over this. I immediately assumed whoever found my old phone somehow bypassed the password. The account had 50 followers and it was following around 150 people. The posts all got like 5 to 10 likes. Most had no comments, but some had basic comments like a flame emoji or whatever. This account was literally pretending to be me. It had a story posted, so I went to check that, and I felt even more sick to my stomach. It was a boomerang panning from my house to my car over and over, as if they were showing off both. A boomerang is basically just a looping 2-second video that goes back and forth from one point to another. This meant whoever was doing this knew where I lived, and had any other information I may have still had on that phone. The story was posted only a few hours ago. I immediately thought to go to find my iPhone settings and turn on Lost Mode. I regretted not doing that the second I lost that phone now. When I tracked my old phone one last time, I was in for another horrible surprise. It said the location of my old phone was right outside our house somewhere. There's a lot of space between houses in our gated community, so there was no mistaking that person was still out there on the property somewhere. I turned on Lost Mode on the old phone, then ran downstairs to get my roommate Corey's attention. It seemed he was already occupied, though, by his husky barking at something in the backyard. Corey was standing by the door watching his dog. I explained in as few words as possible because I felt the situation was dire. We stepped out into the yard together to call his dog in. He was out in the grass barking rather viciously at someone or something out of sight. The dog was barely visible because it was so dark out. We went together to grab the dog by the collar, and as we got hold of him, we saw someone in the bushes run away into the patch of trees that separated our house from the next house. It was like a jump scare moment in a horror movie. That dark figure I saw run into the trees had to be the stalker pretending to be me on Instagram. I just knew it. We brought the dog inside and locked the door. You may ask, why didn't we let the dog chase down whoever it was? That's because Corey's dog is all bark, no bite. He wouldn't ever harm a fly. At some point in the middle of the night, the dog started barking again downstairs by the front door. This was very unusual behavior, so Corey and I both checked out the windows and then stepped outside. It was the most scared I had ever felt in my life, standing on the front porch, looking out into the dark night, knowing someone was out there probably watching us. We went back inside, and for the rest of the night, silence. I think whoever had my phone turned it off or smashed it after I put it in Lost Mode to avoid it being tracked any further. I say this because it would no longer update the location. I checked everywhere by the last known location, but it didn't turn up. After DMing that account that I knew who they were and was filing a report to the police, the account disappeared only a few minutes later. I don't think it was deactivated. I think it was completely deleted. My threat seemed to work. Like I said, this was recently though, and I'm still staying very aware of my surroundings.
I'm an EMT, have been for about 3 years now. I live and work in Southern California, and this particular transport happened when I was a brand new EMS worker of 4 months at a private ambulance company. This company was a private BLS, or basic life support, company primarily, meaning we typically transported patients whose care provider had a contract with us. However, sometimes we would run 911 calls out of prisons, and this is where our story begins. It was late into the night at our station when I heard the tone from my radio. Unit 221, priority response to state prison for an unknown medical. Copy. Wheels up in 2. I replied. I walked over to my partner, who was sleeping on our rec area couch. Rise, sweet prince. A life needs saving, I sarcastically exclaimed. We hopped into the rig, the engine roared to life, and we set off, lights blazing, sirens wailing. As we approached the prison, we killed the lights and sirens and proceeded with the routine security check. Once the guards were satisfied with the search, we were given access and led through the gates and parked outside the medical bay. Gurney and medical equipment in tow, we entered the prison hospital. Now, because my partner was the patient person for the last call, I was going to be primary care provider for this patient. And although I had been a pretty new EMT, I had done a lot of prison transports in a small period of time. I've had inmates scream at me, try to bribe me, and yes, even try to kill me. So as you can imagine, I really wasn't looking for fight night on Unit 221 at 4 in the morning. Regardless, I always prepared for the worst. We were escorted in by guards as usual and led into the main area of the hospital rooms, which were still fitted as cells. I was approached by a nurse, who gave me a sheet of paper with his information and most recent vitals. I began to ask for the turnover report and why this patient required transport and where we were transporting to. The nurse stared blankly for a moment before he said, "You're going to Scripps Mercy Shores Hospital, room 329. He's going because he doesn't feel well and he needs some tests done. He shouldn't be a problem for you." Already a few silent alarms were going off in my head. Scripps Mercy Shores is a rich people hospital. I have never heard of anyone other than someone wealthy going there, let alone a prisoner. Second, not feeling well and needs tests don't really paint me a great picture for why he needs to go and what I'll be dealing with. And finally, what does "he shouldn't be a problem for you" mean? If he's a violent inmate or even an at-risk patient, they'd normally just say so. Getting an actual report on this patient's health and medical condition was like getting blood from a stone. I decided to just relent and go ahead with the transport. The prison guards brought the shackled patient out to us. Another oddity, as every other time I go in and talk with them before getting them onto the gurney. Standing before me was a tall, rather frail-looking man of dark complexion. His eyes were red and sunken. His overall demeanor was a fearful one. He was constantly shivering. He looked terrible. I introduced myself and began my whole checklist of things to ask and address. We'll call him David. He answered all my questions with a small and quivering voice. When asked what the problem was tonight, he gave a quick and frightened glance towards the guards and the nurse. "I don't feel well." His reply sounded forced and rehearsed. Abuse from the staff came to mind first, but I'd address that later. I decided to just go ahead and get this guy going, and I'd wrap everything up in the ambulance. Before loading him in, I asked him the same question I asked all inmate patients. "Be straight with me, and I'll be straight with you. Are you going to cause problems once we get going?" He quickly shook his head no, and we were off. When transporting prisoners, one guard accompanies in the ambulance and another follows in what's called a tail car. This is for everyone's safety and ensuring that if the patient tries anything, an official guard is there to address it. I was busy writing up my report when I realized that between the confusion of the call and the last hour, I had forgotten to get my own set of vitals. A rookie mistake. We were about halfway to our destination, and the patient had remained silent this whole time. I told him I was going to take his vitals and instructed him to give me his arm so I could begin. He did so immediately, like he was trained to obey anything demanded of him, and did so with that haunting look of fear. I wrapped my blood pressure cuff around his arm, and that's when I felt him for the first time. His skin was ice cold. There wasn't even a slight warmth to his skin. I asked him if he'd like a blanket, but he declined. I continued with my evaluation. I inflated the cuff, pressed my stethoscope to his brachial artery, and listened for the pulse to come back to show me his blood pressure. It didn't come back. At first I thought my stethoscope was broken, so I grabbed a spare one. Same result. No pulse. I removed all my equipment and felt for a pulse myself. Nothing. I looked at him and asked if he was all right. He replied with a simple, quiet, "I'm okay, thank you." Caught off guard, I grabbed my pulse oximeter, which I used to find a heart rate and blood oxygen level, and put it on his finger. After a moment of the machine reading, the heart rate came back as 0, and the blood oxygen level came back as 0. My heart dropped. I took another set of vitals to see if I misread anything, but they all came back the same. Heart rate, 0 blood pressure, 0 blood oxygen level, 0. The only thing consistent was his respiratory rate, which was 24 breaths a minute. A bit higher than resting rate, but not alarming in itself. I looked back again and asked him once more if he's okay. He looked me in the eyes and nodded his head yes, as tears welled up in his eyes, then looked away. He was completely alert. He responded perfectly to all my questions. His eyes were equal and reactive, all signs of good brain function, but no signs of a pulse or any vascular activity. At this point, I don't know what to think. Scientifically, there is no reason this guy should be alive. Even if he had an artificial heart, he would be showing vital signs and have a battery pack with a filter kit. But he's right in front of me, alert, breathing, talking when addressed? It makes absolutely no sense. I decided to continue investigating. I listened to his heart with my stethoscope, and there was no beating, no thumping, just the muffled sounds of his breathing. While I was there, I listened to his lungs, all clear, all normal. I had just finished listening to his chest when we pulled into our destination. We offloaded him from the ambulance, took him to the room that we were instructed to, then he hopped off the gurney and was escorted to his hospital bed by the guards. I began giving my almost unbelievable turnover report to the nurse, who surprisingly didn't seem alarmed by any of it. I wrapped up my turnover, then sat down in a nearby chair to finish up my report. As I sat, typing away at my computer, I'm interrupted by the sound of a hospital gurney rolling down the hallway. It was accompanied by 4 people in surgical gowns who entered the inmate's room with said gurney. After a few minutes, the team in the surgical attire emerges from the room, inmate strapped down to the gurney with restraints, audibly crying, and wheeling him down the hallway and around the corner. And this was the last I saw of him. I told my partner once we were back in the ambulance, but he didn't believe me at first, which I can understand. I joke around a lot, but with the look I gave him, he knew I wasn't kidding. Now, this story may not have been what you were expecting. It's not violent or particularly frightening, but this was hands down the most disturbing call I've ever had. I don't know what I saw. I don't know what I transported. I have my theories, such as experimental treatments being carried out on inmates, but with skin like ice, hardly any vital signs, and such a fearful demeanor, I can only wonder what kind of experiments and what kind of horrors that man has faced. So my dad grew up in a small town called Lubango in southwestern Angola. He was born in 1961 and as a child spent most of his time in the dry open land, playing with friends and hunting with his father. Now this story takes place on the 29th of December 1983 when my dad was 22 years old. At this point in life he was working for a petrol company, driving a petrol tanker around the town to various petrol stations. Now this day started as any other, usual pickups here and there. At one particular station, however, he parked the tanker and headed inside the station for the newspaper and a possible cigarette if he was lucky. My dad was familiar with all the different station clerks, and stepping inside this one, he was expecting to see the usual shopkeeper, Roy. But there was no one running the till. My dad assumed he was in the toilet cubicle, so he went to grab a paper, which satisfied my dad enough. Living in Lubango during the Civil War, it was incredibly rare to actually get a newspaper even close to the correct date. My dad was no stranger to the Civil War raging in his country, but he tried to avoid conversation about it as it just made him upset. Unfortunately, this was borderline impossible, considering it was the only excitement the old men in the town experienced. Anyway, upon reading the headline on the newspaper, South Africa Troops Retreat After Devastating Attack, my dad placed the newspaper where it previously lay and scanned the desk for cigarettes. He spotted some rolling paper laid out across the desk with a sprinkle of tobacco sat inside. My dad figured that Roy had started to roll a cigarette when something else had come up. He decided to wait for Roy to come back while he flicked through the collection of newspapers built up on the desk. After 10 long minutes, my dad decided to carry on with his job and just believed Roy had gone on a long walk or something. He was walking to his tanker as the sound of plane propellers filled the sky. This wasn't unseen, but it was rather unusual in Lubango. So my father decided to lean against the cab of his big rig and watch the plane soar by. My dad was so sad to see the juxtaposition of those destructive army planes with the backdrop of the beautiful Angolan sky. The planes were flying low over the Lubango military base, and my dad concluded that they were 2 planes landing in the base after a battle of some sorts. My dad's wondrous expression turned to curiosity as he saw 2 small black dots drop from the bottom of the planes. As the dots fell, my dad's face turned to dread as he watched the 2 planes fly far away. A loud explosion rattled his ears, and he fell to the ground in shock. He looked at the fire cloud that surrounded the military base and watched as it crumbled and burnt. He lay watching for half an hour as chaos ensued in and around his hometown. That moment was the day Lumbago fell. Weeks later, they found Roy's body. It had turned out he had gone on a walk and was found by 2 South African soldiers who interrogated him on the spot. He attempted to escape and retaliate and was shot dead in the process. This was a planned attack by the South African Army called Operation Clinker, and it can be found on the internet, although sadly little information is written about it. I think the story is very important for people to hear, as the Angolan Civil War is an event in history that took countless lives and isn't talked about nearly enough. I believe people need to be educated on this historical landmark. Back when I was 6 or 7, my uncle ended his own life, and my mom took it really hard. She had a drinking problem before this, but she became a full-blown alcoholic after. My mom has always been a mean drunk, and I'm still dealing with the trauma from the things she said and did while I was growing up. As you can imagine, my parents fought a lot because of this. I never knew how bad it had gotten, but I could still tell it was bad. My dad was staying at his parents' house, and my 2 to 3-year-old sister and I were still living at our house with our mom. When I talked to my dad about this a few years ago, he told me that he was in contact with an attorney at that time because the marriage was breaking down, and he was going to fight with all he had to get us away from her because she was by no means fit to take care of us. One night, I was in my room watching something on television, and my sister was asleep in her room when I suddenly hear my dad yelling and my mom throwing up. I was confused because my dad wasn't supposed to be at the house since neither of them could stand to be around each other, but I had learned that it was best to stay in my room when they were fighting, so I didn't go out to see what was happening. Things were quiet for a little bit before my dad burst in my room holding my sister and told me that we needed to go to my aunt's house because she was going to watch us for a while. Again, I thought it was odd because it was probably about 10 p.m., and we never went to anyone's house that late, but I went nonetheless. When we got to the car, my mom was strapped to the front seat, limp as a rag doll, with her mouth hanging open slightly and her eyes glassy and kind of rolled back while she made odd noises. I asked what was wrong with Mommy, and Dad just said she was sick and he was going to take her to the doctors, and that's why we had to go to my aunt's house. I thought it would be okay if my dad was taking her to the doctors to make her feel better. So I got in my spot and put on my seatbelt while my dad put my sister in her car seat. I remember Dad driving really fast, a lot faster than he usually does, but Mommy was sick, so it made enough sense to me. We got to my aunt's house in record time, and my aunt took my sister and I inside while my dad got my mom out of the car and carried her into the house and placed her in the chair nearest the door. I remember my dad asking, "Have you called them? How long did they say it would take before they got here?" And my aunt assuring him that she had taken care of it and it wouldn't be long now. I wasn't sure what they were talking about, but I didn't really care to ask because my mom looked even worse than she did in the car, and I was really worried about her and not whatever they were talking about. My aunt took my sister and I into a back bedroom and turned on the TV before telling us that she would be back in a minute and leaving. I was too curious and worried to stay put, so I left my sister in the room and walked into the kitchen that was adjoined to the living room where everyone else was pacing around, and my dad was contemplating putting my mom back in the car and driving her there himself. I figured he just meant the doctor's office that we usually go to. After a few minutes, I saw flashing lights outside and my dad ran out. He came back in with some emergency personnel and they started checking my mom's vitals. He looked out the open door and saw an ambulance, and that's when I started to get really scared and started crying because I knew enough to know that if an ambulance showed up, something really bad was happening. That's when my dad, my aunt, and the paramedics noticed that I was there, and my aunt took me back into the back bedroom and told me that I wasn't allowed to leave there until she came back. It felt like forever, but eventually things quieted down and my aunt came back. She explained that Mommy had accidentally taken too many pain pills because her back was hurting, and she had forgotten that she had already taken some before. She said that too many pain pills can make you very sick, so Mommy had to go to the hospital and Dad was going with her and we would be staying there that night. I was already a little ball of anxiety at that age, thanks genetics, so I was super freaked out. My aunt did her best to assure me that the doctors would make everything okay and that I didn't have to worry. She gave my sister and I popsicles and let us watch TV as late as we wanted. The next morning, she told me that she had heard from my dad and that Mommy was doing better, but we would be staying with her for at least another night. She then took my sister and I to pick up some strawberry milk, pretty much the only thing my sister would consume without a fight at that time, and to get me breakfast at McDonald's because their pancakes and bacon was my all-time favorite thing. The rest of the day was pretty much a blur, and I'm sure it was filled with cartoons and coloring. The next day was a Monday, but I didn't go to school like I normally would have. My dad came and picked us up in the afternoon. Mom was home when we got there, and Dad started staying at the house again. Everything just kind of went back to normal after that, except Mom would only drink on the weekends from then on. She'd still get drunk, but there were fewer arguments because she would stay down on the couch those nights, and my dad would be in their room with the doors locked. No one ever brought up the incident again, but it stuck with me ever since. In my late teens, I was eating dinner with my dad at some fast food place because Mom and my sister were doing something else, and I finally brought it up. I said, "Hey, remember that time when I was 6 or 7 and Mom accidentally took too many pain pills?" He stopped eating and went a little pale before answering in the affirmative. I said, "It was an accident, huh?" He sighed and said that he had really hoped that I had forgotten about that since I was so young and didn't know what was going on, but then confirmed my suspicion. I told him that not only had I not forgotten, but I can still remember what pajamas I was wearing that night, color and pattern and all. Light blue Lizzie McGuire pajamas with long dark blue sleeves, a picture of the animated Lizzie on the front with red and dark blue stars all over the pants. As stated before, the marriage was breaking down, and Dad was living with his parents as he prepared for an ugly divorce. That night, my mom tried to take her own life by overdosing on pills that she had from a surgery, but got scared when they started to really take effect and called my dad. He flew over to the house as fast as he could and started yelling at my mom for doing something like this while he held her hair back as she vomited up as many of the pills as she could. He then got her into the car and called my aunt to tell her what was happening, and that we were on our way because he needed someone to watch us and that she needed to call 911 so that the paramedics would meet us there. Her house was about halfway between our house and the near hospital. After that, he got us into the car and sped all the way to my aunt's house. My dad followed the ambulance in his car and spent the whole time I was at my aunt's house at the hospital. When my mom was stable and awake, they had a serious conversation about where they went from there. He was unbelievably angry that she would do such a thing while we were alone with her in the house. What if she didn't call him and actually succeeded in taking her own life? One of us would have woken up and found our mother's dead body. Did she even stop to think what that would have done to us? He minced no words in telling her how angry he was and that if she ever decided to pull something like this again, it would better not be with us around. Instead of insisting, we talked things out and decided to try and reconcile, which did end up happening since they're still together today. Again, it's not as bad as some of the others, but 26 now, and that is still the sharpest memory I have of my childhood, and likely contributed heavily to the fact that for years afterward, I had to know where everyone was at all times so I could check on them whenever I felt like I needed to, and I would scream and cry hysterically if I couldn't find one of them. I still think about it from time to time, and it never fails to bring back that feeling of dread that I felt when I saw the ambulance that night. So I'm a 21-year-old male, and this experience happened last summer while I was on vacation at Myrtle Beach with my family. We were staying in a resort right on the beach, and we're on the 13th or 14th floor in a sort of timeshare. One night I was feeling restless and having a hard time falling asleep, and at around 3 a.m., I decided to go out on the balcony to get some air. I stepped out and was stunned as there was a full moon, and the moonlight on the water was really beautiful. The beach was completely empty as far as I could see, and I had never seen it like that before. I decided that since I wasn't able to sleep, I might as well head down, take a stroll, and listen to some music to relax. Hopefully when I returned, I'd be able to get some sleep. It was really unsafe and dumb of me, but since it was 3 a.m. and the rest of my family was asleep, I decided to just head down without letting any of them know I was going, as I thought I would just go and chill there for about 10 to 15 minutes, then come right back up. So at the base of the timeshare we were at, there was an area with a pool, an outdoor bar, and then 2 boardwalks separated by about 100 feet, which both led to the beach. On the sides of the boardwalks, there were swaths of tall grass separating the ocean and the resort. When I got down to the base, the entire area was completely deserted, and I started walking down the boardwalk on the right towards the beach. As I'm walking down, I suddenly see someone approaching me from the beach, which was strange because I had a pretty clear view of the same area from the balcony just before and had literally seen no one. I start to get a bit nervous as I see this figure approach, and as I get closer, I see it as a man, maybe in his late 30s, who has a backpack on and is wearing glasses with large square lenses. As he gets closer, I get a clearer look at him as the boardwalk is sort of illuminated by lights from the outdoor bar. He looks very on edge and alert, almost like he's trying to find someone who's trying to meet him in this area, and his clothes are somewhat tattered. We made eye contact, and I sort of nod at him and pass. At this point, I'm creeped out, because, honest to God, he had a sort of Jeffrey Dahmer look. If he was the glasses, and he just didn't seem like he actually belonged to the timeshare. I shake it off and keep walking down the beach and put my headphones in. As I get down to the beach, I turn right and start walking parallel to the water, and I'm just taking in the scenery. I'm barefoot and decide it'd be nice to walk just along the shoreline, so I move closer to the water and continue walking. I'm walking for no longer than a minute before I get a really strange feeling that something is wrong. I take off my headphones and turn around, and I see a dark figure that is trailing me just upshore. He is situated in between me and the timeshare. I immediately can tell from the figure's height, body type, and demeanor that it is the same man I passed on the boardwalk. At this point, I'm starting to panic, as every story from Let's Read is rushing to my head. At the same time, I'm trying to rationalize, as it feels too surreal that I may actually be in a dangerous situation. So I remind myself it could just be a coincidence, and the man decided he also wanted to take a walk on the beach, and just happened to be headed in the same direction as me. So I take some breaths and turn my head back to the ocean and continue walking in the same direction. After a couple of seconds, I turn my head back again, and seeing that now, he is much closer to me, and is not walking parallel to me, but is definitely actually walking towards me. I picked up my walking speed now and turned my head back around and see he is matching my faster pace and is still walking towards me and the water. So for some reason I think, okay, maybe he also wants to walk by the water. There's no way I'm actually being followed by a creepy man on a deserted beach. So at this point, to truly test it, I do a 180 and completely change directions. And as I turn my head, I see him completely change directions with me and continue closing in distance, and he's power walking now. It suddenly hits me that I'm in a really bad situation, and I take off in a run along the water, and he starts running as well. He stays up shore of me so that if I try to run up towards the boardwalk, he will intercept me. Freaking out now and just keep running with no plan, but figured that since I'm 20 and sort of fit, I should probably be able to keep running along the water and outrun him, and then find some other exit off the beach and either call my family or head back to the timeshare on the road. So I keep running, but he's keeping up with me, and this goes on for what feels like 10 to 15 minutes. The scariest part of all of this, which I wouldn't have thought of, is it is completely dead silent. All I hear is my breath and feet on the sand, and when I turn, I only see his shadowy figure up shore keeping pace with me. Suddenly up ahead, in the sand, I see a small blue light and what looks like 4 people on the beach with a blanket. They are a bit upshore. I turn and look at the figure, and that even though they are upshore, I can beat him to these people, so I start sprinting towards them with the hopes of quickly telling them what's going on so we all can confront him. I really use up my energy sprinting towards them, and as I approach, my heart drops. What I see is 4 guys on a blanket, with 3 or 4 handles of hard liquor surrounding them. 3 of the handles are empty, and the 4th is half empty. 3 of the guys are just completely passed out in the blankets, and the last is half sat up, obviously beyond drunk, with a sort of party hat on that has blue lights on it. He was talking to himself. His eyes are half closed, and he doesn't even register me approaching him. Now, I'm no more than 5 feet away. I turn and see the figure slow down, observing me, and then I see he makes sense of the group's state and suddenly starts sprinting at me. As he gets closer, the half-passed out guy's blue light illuminates him, and I can clearly see it's the same guy as before. I make eye contact with him, and I can see he's wide-eyed and looks almost manic, and is barreling at me full sprint. At this point, I decided to do something decisive. It seemed like I had underestimated his fitness, and since I had just sprinted towards this group and exhausted myself, I was afraid that he might be able to catch up to me if we just continued running along the beach indefinitely, and then who knows what. So instead of turning around and running, I suddenly sprint towards him and to the right, which I don't think he was expecting at all. I catch him off balance and run past him, and I literally am full sprinting back to the timeshare without even looking back. Literally all the hairs on my neck were standing, and it felt like a dream where you're barely evading someone, but he's right about to catch you. The adrenaline was crazy, and I keep running and start to see the timeshare. I finally turn around to see how close he is, and I see him in the distance, maybe 400 to 500 feet away. He's lost a lot of distance on me. I don't waste any time and sprint up the boardwalk and towards the base of the timeshare. I jam the elevator buttons and leap in, and start mashing the closed door button as I'm gasping for air. The door closes and I hit the button for my floor, and when the elevator reaches, I literally sprint back to my room, open the door, enter, and then slam the door and double lock it. I'm breathing heavy, and I drop to the floor and just sit there for a minute, not believing what just happened. I crouch and crawl over to my room, as I was literally afraid he might be able to see through the window on our balcony, and I enter my room. Let's just say I definitely wasn't able to sleep after that. I met a guy online, and we lived pretty far away, so I felt way too comfortable getting close to him. I should have been more careful and wary about being friends with a stranger online, but I was short-sighted. We live in different countries. I live in the United States, and he lives in Korea, so I felt fine getting close to him. When we first started talking, he was pretty reserved and a normal-seeming guy. Our friendship got weird, though, because after a month or two of knowing each other, he came to a neighboring city of mine because he wanted to visit some family. It was weird because I noticed that he spent a lot of time in my city rather than his family's. Since my city is actually a city and his family's city was very rural, I ignored it and believed him when he said he was bored. I introduced him to my friends and family. He was bored, lonely, and having a hard time, so I felt bad for him. He got close to a lot of my friends, too close for me to feel comfortable, and he's still in contact with some of them. He was in our city for a few weeks before going home to Korea again. While he was there, he genuinely seemed like a normal guy. He was nice, funny, and made more friends in a few weeks of being here than I had for the years I've been here. He got home and called me every day. Around this time, quarantine started in both of our hometowns, so I assumed he was calling me often out of being lonely and bored. Since I too was lonely and bored, I kept up with his calls. He managed to make me feel like somehow even my best friends cared less about me because they didn't seem to want to talk to me. He made me feel more alone while still talking to me for hours a day. A few months into our friendship, I started to notice how superficial he was with me. He knows so much about me, but he was very good at avoiding telling me anything about himself. He made a few comments, and I thought he was being abused or something. I thought he didn't tell me anything because of that, but he started becoming different to me, and I realized that maybe that's not the case. He started asking me questions like, if you had to choose between me and your dad, who would you choose? Or, what about between me and your dogs? I obviously chose my family because I had only known him for months. We were only friends anyway. It's not like he was my boyfriend or husband. I don't know why he was expecting a different response than the one I gave him. He also, around this time, started doing something that irritated me beyond measure. He began hooking up with random people he'd meet in bars and stuff, but after hooking up with them, he thought that they were loose and easy. I told him he was being a hypocrite because he was doing the same thing, but he told me that I was wrong because girls who hook up with people are such and such, and since he's a guy, it doesn't apply to him. After arguing for a while about this, I saw it wasn't going anywhere. I chose to ignore his immature attitude and assumed that maybe there was a cultural or language-based barrier that prevented us from fully understanding what he was talking about. My strange interactions with him began to increase rapidly. He would always ask if I was around family, and if I was, he wanted me to move away from them when I talked to him. I thought this was very weird, as he's met my family, but I also was in quarantine and was lonely. I didn't want to risk losing a friend. I would go to my room whenever I wanted to talk to him. At this point in time, when I was talking to him, he would often interject saying things like, "Did I ask? Why would or should I care? Or shut up, I literally don't care." I told him I didn't like that, and he would always reply saying it was a joke, and he was that way with all of his friends. I was beginning to feel really uncomfortable and pathetic every time he called. It was stupid how much I let him get under my skin. He made comments about how well he knew me and that he knew so much about me. The worst part is that he wasn't wrong. Sometimes we were chatting for up to 8 hours a day. We were watching movies together over Zoom, discussing random things all the time, and he was sometimes even chatting with various members of my family and friends. At one point, he got really brave. He started telling me in vivid details dreams that he had had about me. He made comments about imagining me on top of him, sitting on certain parts of his body, and him doing things to me in his dreams. I feel like I should say this so that it's a little bit clearer why this was weird for me. Even though I'm in my 20s, not saying how old for anonymity reasons, I've never had a boyfriend before. I never had my first kiss before. I'm a virgin. I felt dirty with him saying these things to me, so I expressed that with him, but I feel like that encouraged him. He seemed to enjoy me that way too much. Multiple times, he decided to go over his sort of intimate dreams he had for me. I felt like this was weird, but I've never been in a relationship like that before, so I started wondering if maybe I was wrong that behavior was weird. I called a friend who moved to a different state for college and asked her about it. She told me it was strange and I should cut things off. Deep down, I agreed with her, but I wasn't sure how to end it. He was really intertwined with my life. He was also one of the only people my age I had consistent contact with. I didn't want to lose the only person who was actually talking to me. I didn't want to be alone. So I ironically put up with all of his odd behaviors towards me. Whenever my phone rang and I saw his name, my stomach fell into the pit of my butt. My stomach would feel the same way it feels to smell vomit. I wasn't sure about how to process everything happening in our friendship. I was putting up with a lot, and I think I hit a point where I started feeling responsible. I put myself into this position, and if I leave, he has other means of access to me. I connected him to everyone in my life. I gave him easy access to me, and he knows everyone in my life. He knows my address, and he has friends connected to me through the school that I go to and the church that I attend. I did this to myself. I trapped myself here, and now I have to put up with it. I didn't cut him off and let things progress. He started asking me to send him pictures. He wanted to picture my face every day, and he wanted me to send him pictures of me in the shower and in the bath. Instead, I started sending him pictures of cute K-pop idols as a joking way to avoid his requests, and this made him angry. He would call me multiple times a day at ridiculously late hours, and if I didn't pick up his calls, he'd spam call me and message me. I started getting short with him and picking up calls asking what do you want, or why are you calling me at like 3 a.m.? And he hated that. He said that he didn't like that I was becoming a meaner person. He said I was hurting his feelings, and I, again, dumbly felt bad and thought that maybe I really was the one in the wrong. I don't know when all of these things started happening, but he also began making awful comments when he was upset with me. He was wishing that I would be killed. He started asking creepy questions about my sister, who was a minor. He often made comments about my mouth and the things he wanted to do to it. I told him he wouldn't get my permission, and he said that he would do it without my permission. He asked more than once, something along the lines of, if I were to grab you and kiss you, insert various public locations here, what would you do to me? Do you want to kiss me? He would also tell me about how he wanted to hurt some of his innocent peers. He would beat up some of his classmates for entertainment without them previously doing anything to actually upset him. He claimed to just like hurting people. He started asking me to pucker my lips at him like I was kissing him through the FaceTime camera, and if he managed to make me feel terrible enough, he was sometimes able to get me to do it. We FaceTimed so often that at one point I accidentally flashed my bra, and another time I was wearing shorts and accidentally flashed my cheeks. He brought these up all of the time. He talked about how squishy my butt looked and the things that he wanted to do. I fell asleep a few times during our FaceTimes, and he claimed that in one of them, I moved and he was able to even see my bare chest. He told me that he screenshotted it. Even now, I don't know how many screenshots he actually has of me and whether or not he actually has a picture of that, but there's so much more, and I don't know how to organize a year's worth of this stuff in my head. I'm going abroad soon to a school near his house. He knows that I'm going there, and he knows when I will be arriving for and how long I'll be there. I'm paranoid. I finally briefly skimmed over a few incidents to my parents, and they convinced me to block him, and I'm scared of being murdered or worse once I get there. It's my dream to study abroad, and I want to work on my fluency in the language, but he threatened me more than once. He's a fighter for fun. He loves violence. But now I'm stuck with the consequences of making friends with a stranger online. I'm not sure what to do. I bought a keychain that doubles as a self-protection stick. I've considered cutting off all of my hair and dyeing it, wearing a hat, mask, and sunglasses every time I'm out, and even wearing tons of clothes, hiding in crowds, and never going anywhere by myself while I'm there. But I'm not sure what to do. What do you do in this situation? How do I, a short, unathletic, and somewhat naive girl, manage to avoid and or get away from a guy who believes he's entitled to my time? How do I stay safe when he, a tall, athletic, and violent guy, knows so much about me, possibly has photos of me, and will be living next door to my campus? If you have any advice for me, please let me know. I'm planning on posting these on a few subreddits because I'm hoping for some input from various communities. I'm not paying for therapy, but instead I'm asking for advice. Does anyone have advice on how I should handle this situation? So I started high school when I was young, barely 13 years old. I'm a female, now a junior. I didn't think anything about this guy since I wasn't focused on people. I didn't really care about anyone else except two friends I had in the classes I had with him. He was 17 at the time, and yes, in those classes the grade levels were mixed. Nothing ever stuck out to me as odd about him, since I rarely paid attention to him, until one day in biology I looked up from my paper and saw him taking pictures of me. I was creeped out, but didn't say anything in case I was wrong. Then days later he found my Instagram and kept texting me, which I obviously never responded to, and if I had to, I would be very dry and just leave him on scene. Then one day in the middle of class, I got a text from a random number saying, "Hey," with my name and various emojis like heart ones, and I immediately knew it was him since earlier he was asking for my number, which I declined to give him. I immediately went to the two friends in that class to yell at them for telling him, which they replied, "We never gave it to him." They even showed me their phones and let me go through them and their messages with him, and no number of mine was ever mentioned despite his numerous texts asking for them. I never answered him and desperately tried to avoid him until one day on Instagram, I got a text from him saying, "You're so pretty," to which I replied that I wasn't pretty, and then he spammed me with pictures that he had taken of me. And that wasn't even the creepiest part. There were like 50 plus pictures of me, ranging from classes, around the school campus, and even outside of school, like near the bus stop or waiting for a friend at the quad to go somewhere. There was even some of me playing soccer with friends on the football field. It's used for soccer too, since the soccer fields get flooded easily and constantly is getting fixed to look pretty. Obviously, I left him on scene, blocked him, and avoided him even more, to the point that I started skipping class. And when I did go, I told the teacher what happened while I was shaking, and she let me go to the dean of the school, where I showed them everything and even gave them the number I got the message from. It's been 2 years. I'm a junior now, stayed in the schools since they have connections to a hospital I want to volunteer in, and because I have great friends there, and he's made new accounts on everything, Instagram, Snapchat, and probably got a new number, and he has been trying to follow me and message me for weeks now. I keep blocking him, but new accounts are created. I'm honestly glad for quarantine since I would probably be nervous to go to class or even school. It's also worth mentioning that it's still not known how he got my number, as the only two people who had it never gave it to him, and I'm 100% sure that he was following me around school, even after I told the dean. I was born in 1970. I'm a male. For as long as I can remember, I've seen the same woman, always at a distance. Let me explain. When I'm in a moving vehicle, I'll see her on the street. If I'm walking down the street, she'll be on the other side of the street. I've seen her through restaurants and shop windows. I was passing under a bridge, and she was on the bridge. She never ages. She looks exactly the same now as she did when I was little. And whenever I see her, she looks right at me and smiles. It's kind of a sad smile, like there's always something she wants to say but can't. My earliest memory of her was when I was around 4 or 5 years old. I was riding in the car with my oldest sister driving. I remember looking out the window and the lady was standing on the corner. We looked at each other and she smiled that sad smile, and I remember saying that to my sister, that lady looks sad. My sister looked over and said she didn't see anybody, which didn't make sense to me because she was standing right there and she was the only one there. I chalked it up to my sister messing with me. After starting elementary school, I would see her from time to time outside the windows, and as always, she would look at me and smile that same sad smile. Over the years, I've estimated her age to be early 20s. Her hair is long and brown and her eyes are blue, the same as mine. She's always wearing a dress of some kind. They've been various colors over the years, but always like a light summer dress. Nothing that would identify her to any particular place and time. And it's always either spring or summer when she appears to me. As I got older, I quit trying to point her out to people because nobody ever saw her. The only exception being a friend's toddler who I was minding while her mother was in the bank. We were sitting on the hood of my car drinking juice boxes and talking about whatever interests a 3-year-old. I looked up and the lady was on the other side of the street. There were cars going each way, but the only people around was the three of us. I looked at her. She smiled and for the first time waved. Before I could wave back, my friend's daughter waved at her. I asked if she saw the lady and she giggled and said yes and said she wanted a flowery dress like hers. I looked back at the lady, but just then my friend came out of the bank, distracting me. When I looked up again, she was gone. The toddler's grown now and has no memory of that day, as would be expected. When I was a punk teenager, I decided that the next time I saw her, I was going to approach her and find out what her story was. The only thing was, I never knew when I would see her. There was no rhyme or reason or pattern to it that I could see, and I got my opportunity 2 weeks before my 18th birthday. I was driving somewhere and I saw her standing next to a party store. I quickly pulled into the parking lot and jumped out of the car, keeping my eye on her. When I almost got hit by another car, I took my eyes off of her for a millisecond, and she was gone. I tried numerous other times with the same result. I finally accepted that it was never going to happen. She's never given me a malicious vibe or a beneficial vibe. She's just there, smiling that sad smile. I've tried calling out to her, but as you'd expect, there's never an answer. I'm 50 now, and I still see her from time to time. She's still in her early 20s. I drive trucks long distance, and I've seen her all over the country. A friend of mine who's into spiritualism says that she could be someone who's connected to me somehow. I have no idea how. I'm hoping when my time on Earth is through, I'll get to talk to her and find out who she is. It's weird that I only see her in spring or summer. Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. I do find comfort in seeing her. It's hard to explain, but if she ever stopped appearing to me, I believe that I would grieve. Seeing her, even though we never speak, and she only ever waved once, gives me a good feeling. I would like to know what the story is behind that sad smile. I would say it was more paranormal, my experience. I'm not sure, but to set the scene, we live in the desert in northern Arizona. Small population towns, 20 to 30 miles between some towns. One night, a couple of months ago, I was driving home from my mother-in-law's house to our house. It's a 35 to 40-minute drive through the desert. It was late, and it was just my newborn baby and I. My husband works late, and I was at his mom's house, so I wasn't alone all day. To get home, you have to drive through about 20 minutes of Indian reservation. And the only thing between the town she lives in and our town was a tiny gas station that is closed after 7 p.m. This was in August, so the sun isn't setting till 9:30 or so. So it had to have been about 10 or 11 because it was pitch black out. I remember passing the station, and I vividly remember checking the gas price on the large illuminated sign the gas stations have, because gas is usually cheaper there, and because it is on the reservation, they don't charge taxes. The large chevron sign shone bright in the pitch black, but the prices were not lit. It didn't seem weird to me because the gas station has been closed for a few months due to the epidemic, but you could still get gas at the pump with your card. I remember checking my rear view to see if the prices were listed on the opposite side. They weren't. No biggie. I had plenty of gas and just wanted to check. So I get about half a mile past the station and see a bright light in the distance. This is a long stretch of desert road where you can see forever in front of you and forever behind you because there are not many turns in the road. I thought it was odd because there is nothing but desert and tall red cliffs to the north where I saw the light. Maybe it was just a vehicle on one of the old dirt roads. As I approached it, I was entirely confused. It was the gas station. Again. What in God's name? I thought as I passed the station for a second time. I chalked it up to me being sleep-deprived because I had just had a baby and wasn't getting much sleep. Although I was still freaked out a little because I could see the gas station's lights in my rear view when I saw this new light. Whatever, it's late, I'm tired. I keep driving. Again, I see another light off in the distance. I think maybe it's a new billboard I didn't notice on the way. I get closer, and I kid you not, it is the gas station for a third time. I'm wide awake at this point, tripping out. I have drove this road 1,000,000 times. There's no cell service on the reservation, and I am not knowing what to do. So obviously I keep driving, get past the gas station once again, and what do you know? I see this light out in the distance for a fourth time. I get closer. It's this gas station for the fourth time now. I'm losing it. I'm thinking I'm going to be stuck in some sort of loop of another dimension forever with my brand new baby. Some glitch in the Matrix or something. I am also terrified because I have heard many stories of skinwalkers in this area. If you've never heard of a skinwalker, look them up, and you're welcome for the nightmares. So we passed the gas station for the fourth time.